Hey guys, tonight we travel back to a time of candles, chastity belts, and courtly chaos to explore what medieval weddings were really like. Imagine waking up on a scratchy straw mattress, the fire's long gone out, and your mother's already muttering something about goats and dowries. You're 14, give or take a few birth records, and today's the day you find out. You're betrothed. Not exactly something you asked for, but hey, welcome to the 14th century. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from anywhere interesting, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're young. It's probably still confused about why everyone keeps calling adulthood the harvest of responsibility. And you've just found out your parents have arranged your wedding. You don't know the groom too well. He once gave you a lump of cheese at the village fair, which you considered both flirtatious and alarming. This is how marriage begins for most people in your world. Not with love letters or candlelit dinners, but with a handshake, a dowry, and a vague hope that you won't hate each other entirely. Historians still argue whether love ever truly factored into medieval matches, or if it was just an afterthought once the grain and livestock were settled. You roll out of bed, brush your teeth with a twig, and mumble something at the family sheep as you try to process what this means. You're betrothed, legally promised. No backing out now. Unless, of course, the Pope himself intervenes, which he probably won't. Unless you're secretly a royal with a cursed bloodline. By breakfast, some barley bread and watered ale. Father's already drawing up plans for what the dowry will include. There's talk of half a pig, a small patch of land, and 3 wool cloaks in serviceable condition. Your mother's muttering about whether the other family's daughter ever learned to sew straight. And your brother is already trying to trade your future husband's brother for an extra ox in this world. You're not just getting married. Forming an alliance. Your family gains stability, maybe a few more chickens, and the satisfaction of knowing their lineage will continue whether you're ready or not. And to be fair, at 14, you're as ready as anyone in the village, your friend. Anna already has 2 kids and a back problem. There's no grand announcement. Just a quiet word passed around at church, and a knowing nod from old Agnes, who lives by the river and always smells faintly of nettles and suspicion. She remembers every wedding since King Richard was still a boy. You spend the next few weeks pretending not to think about it, which doesn't work. Every time someone says wife, you flinch. Every time the other family's son walks by, you look away. He has strong shoulders, sure, but also the emotional availability of a wooden cart. Still, people are treating you differently. Your cousins start asking you things like, will you live with his family or yours? And do you know how to churn butter properly? As if that's the only skill separating maiden from matron. And honestly, maybe it is. Your days go on as usual, helping in the garden, avoiding the rooster, and occasionally whispering your fate to the moon like a soap opera heroine. But everything feels different now, because you're not just you anymore. You're a bride in training. A future mistress of a future house, with a future filled with babies and bannocks. There's still time, though. Betrothal isn't immediate. Marriage, it's a kind of medieval engagement, sealed with a promise, but not quite the real deal yet. You've got a year, maybe 2, depending on when your father thinks your hips look childbearing enough. And yes, people did talk about that, extensively. Meanwhile, you start getting little hints of attention. A new ribbon from your aunt. A basket of herbs from the village healer to keep the skin smooth. Even the chickens seem to cluck. More politely when you pass. You're still mud on your boots. Hey, in your sleeves, but now you carry a different weight. The weight of everyone's expectations. Of joining 2 houses, however humble they may be, and of somehow figuring out how to share a life with a boy whose conversational skills include exactly 4 topics: wheat, rain, pig diseases, and that. One time he fell into a well and didn't cry, but in your quietest moments. When the fire's gone low and the stars are blinking through the thatch, you imagine what it might be like: marriage, partnership, maybe even someday a little affection. Stranger things have happened, like that one woman who married the baker and never had to cook again. Fairy tale, honestly. For now, though, you're betrothed. congratulations. Your future has begun. And you didn't even have time to finish your barley porridge. The first thing you learn about medieval weddings is that they're not really about you. It's not romantically, not emotionally, and definitely not logistically. They're about property, lineage, status, and livestock. It's your betrothal. It sets off a flurry of negotiations between your father and your future father-in-law, who, up until now, only exchanged nods at the Sunday market and once haggled over a suspiciously lopsided goat. But now, these two men are practically in laws bonded by mutual self-interest. Suspicion and an old bottle of plum wine that emerges during the first of many dowry discussions. The setting, a wooden table near a smoky hearth, 2 mugs of ale. Between them and your future hanging in the balance over whether your family can throw in an extra sheaf of wheat, or perhaps access to the well without dispute, you're not invited, of course. Your mother might hover in the background, pretending to tend the fire while glaring daggers at any suggestion that your embroidery isn't worth at least 1 full cloak. You, meanwhile, are sent outside with your cousin to pick herbs and stay, out of earshot, as if the sound of your fate being negotiated might cause some kind of permanent emotional damage. Historians still argue whether medieval girls truly understood the gravity of these deals, or if they were simply too busy trying to get out of spinning flax. The marriage contract, because yes, there is a contract as written out by a notary or a priest who's 1 ink blot away from illegibility. It's an official document that reads like a weird shopping list. 1 daughter, aged 15, of sound mind and body mostly, offered in exchange for 2 oxen, 3 sacks of barley, and exclusive rights to fish the eastern stream from midsummer. To Michaelmas, there may be clauses things, like if the bride fails to produce a male heir within 3 years, additional goats will be provided. Or in the event of demonic possession, all agreements are null and void. Okay, that last one's rare, but not unheard of. The notary will try to look impartial, but he's also been offered a fine wheel of cheese to lean in your family's favor. Your father is negotiating like a chess master who only plays on Tuesdays. And your mother keeps coughing pointedly every time your suitor's family suggests you're a bit quiet. You, of course, meanwhile attempting to perfect the art of looking sweet, but also slightly mysterious, kind of peasant-era Instagram filter, where your eyes say obedient, but your brows say might poison your porridge if you push. Me. And then comes the seal. A great wax lump pressed onto parchment with a signet ring, usually bearing a family crest, or, in your family's case, a vaguely angry-looking rooster. The seal is important. It means the deal is binding. Backing out now requires divine intervention, or a lot of very fast walking in the opposite direction. Betrothals are usually made early, sometimes as young as 7, though most people wait until a girl's around 12 or 13 to get things moving. Boys get a little longer, which is to say until someone decides their chin hair is officially visible. If you're lucky, get to meet your future husband before the wedding. If you're really lucky, he's not too much older than you, and doesn't smell like pickled herring, a surprisingly common cologne in the north. Your suitor, for his part, isn't exactly thrilled either. He's being told to smile, nod, and not say anything about the time he saw you crying because the milkmaid yelled at you. He's trying very hard to appear capable of plowing a field, running a household, and not falling asleep during prayers all, while not staring directly at your hair, which you've carefully braided in what you hope is an alluring pattern. Probably looks like a squirrel got tangled in yarn, but points for effort. Quirky aside, some regions used odd tokens to seal the agreement. A shared drink from a ceremonial cup, a small exchange of personal items like a ring or a belt, or even a dried apple passed between families. Some poorer couples had nothing to exchange, so they simply pledged vows in front of witnesses, shaking hands over a plow or a family cow named Marjorie. Yes, sometimes the cow attended the ceremony. In your case, the contract is agreed upon, with only minor argument, and your father celebrates by letting you keep the nice wooden spoon for the week. He also lets your little brother lick the sealing wax once it's cooled, which frankly explains a lot about his general behavior. The promise has been made. You're not married yet, but you're definitely spoken for. That changes everything, people. In the village, start looking at you differently. You're no longer that girl who fell in the pig trough last spring, but the betrothed daughter of Thomas, the wheelwright. That sounds fancier than it is, but reputation is everything in a place where gossip travels faster than the plague. The contract is usually kept with the church or in the Lord's manor, depending on how official your lives are. Probably won't see it again unless something goes terribly wrong, like someone dies or someone runs away with the Thatcher's son. Both have happened frequently. But we'll get there. For now, you've entered a new phase of life. You are no longer a child, not quite a wife, and definitely no longer allowed to join in the hay-jumping games with the unmarried girls. You spend more time sewing, learning recipes, practicing how to nod in a way that says yes, dear, without sounding sarcastic. It's a delicate art. And just like that, your wedding is no longer a vague future event. It's coming. It's with bells, bread, and probably at least one drunk uncle and hose.
The contract is signed.
You're officially on the marital conveyor belt. Courtship in the Middle Ages wasn't exactly candlelit dinners and long walks on the beach, less your definition of beach includes a muddy riverbank with questionable fish smells and the occasional duck-related accident. You're betrothed. Now, which means the courtship is mostly a formality, but it still has to happen, publicly, symbolically, and with just the right amount of awkward. Eye contact. Your future husband, let's call him Edwin, because all decent medieval suitors seem to be named. Edwin, or something equally vowel, has been advised by his uncle to appear gentlemanly, which means he tries not to scratch himself while he talks to you and bows whenever he remembers to. It's sort of charming, sort of. You, on the other hand, have been coached by every married woman you know on how to behave. Smile, but not too wide. Be quiet, but not too quiet. Don't mention your dreams unless they involve turnips or babies. Medieval flirtation is a dance of subtle glances, veiled remarks, and small, strange gifts. Mainstream historical fact? Poems were indeed part of courtship. Especially among the more literate classes, suitors would compose verses sometimes borrowed, sometimes original, to impress their beloved. You might receive a little scroll of parchment with 4 lines about your rosy cheeks, your golden hair, or your ability to churn butter without splashing your apron. The best part? These poems often contained allegory, so when he writes your eyes are like 2 shining stars, what he's really saying is, my father says I should marry you before winter. If he's not a poet, he might go the animal route. Small tokens of affection, like a freshly caught rabbit, a particularly fat chicken, or a carved wooden spooner, all acceptable and occasionally romantic. Especially if accompanied by the phrase, "This reminded me of you." Historians still argue whether that was meant as flattery or just confusion. Either way, you're now the proud recipient of a very alert-looking hen. You might also get a lock of hair. Not always human. Sometimes it's yours, gifted to him in a little pouch, sometimes his. Though there's a story floating around about one overly enthusiastic boy who gave a girl a tuft of sheep wool, claiming it was from his own noble beard. He was 13. It was not a beard. The idea of love blossoming before marriage exists, but it's usually on a tight schedule. You're expected to be friendly, not flirty. Warm, but modest. Every word you speak is mentally filed away by your chaperone, who is never more than 3 steps behind you. That's right, you don't go anywhere alone. You talk while others listen. A walk through the fields is nice, but only if your cousin Agnes is trailing 2 paces behind. Pretending to gather nettles while definitely eavesdropping. Still, you find ways to connect. Maybe you both like the same minstrel ballad. Maybe he's less horrible than you feared. Maybe he lets you ride his horse, which you pretend to hate but secretly adore. There's even a bit of a thrill in seeing each other at market and exchanging that one loaded glance that says, we're probably going to be legally bound by next spring. Weird, huh? Some noble families stage more elaborate courtships, complete with tournaments, dances, and embroidered love tokens. A knight might wear your colors at a joust. A lady might drop a handkerchief accidentally at his feet. These things sound grand, but even they come with pressure. The whole idea of courtly love was less about actual romance and more about social performance. You're not just wooing the bride, You're wooing her lineage, her alliances, and her family's grain stores. For most peasants, though, it's simpler. A shared chore. A moment during sheep shearing. Maybe he helps your father build a fence and tries not to wince when you hand him a cup of water. Your hands brush. Your hearts do not necessarily flutter, but your grandmother cackles from a distance and mutters something about the good old days. Now, there are fringe traditions too. In parts of medieval France, young men would serenade their intended beneath their window at night. In rural England, lovers carved each other's initials into trees, spoons, and occasionally livestock. In Scandinavia, there are records of love breads, little loaves baked with herbs and secret messages inside. You once heard about a girl who stuffed a dried toad into her crush's lunch as a love spell? It didn't work. You married her sister. So where are you and Edwin in all this? Somewhere between mild tolerance and cautious optimism. You're getting used to each other. He's surprisingly decent at whittling. You're better at cheese-making than anyone expected. When you laugh, he doesn't look confused. It's not. Love not yet, but it might not be terrible either, of course. Everyone around you is watching this courtship like it's the final act in a morality play. They want to see decency, piety, and the occasional touch of romance, as long as it doesn't involve kissing before vows. Scandal is best saved for after the wedding. It's preferably during the bedding ceremony, but we'll gently get to that. As you sit by the fire one night, sorting lentils and humming an old harvest tune, Edwin walks by and awkwardly leaves a carved comb on the table. You look up. He nods. That, dear listener, is courtship. You don't own much. A pair of shoes that squeak in damp weather, 2 tunics, one passably clean into woolen shawl that's seen more winters than you have. But now that you're betrothed, your wardrobe suddenly matters in a way it never did before. Because how else will people know you're taken, if not by the way you wrap your elbows? Fashion in the Middle Ages is a funny beast. It's both a personal expression and a walking announcement board. Being engaged, it's a billboard-sized statement right on your sleeves. Let's start with the basics. You're a village girl. You don't have access to Italian silks or cloth of gold. Unless someone loses a bet, or you somehow befriend a traveling minstrel with a secret noble parent. But you do have homespun wool, good dyes matter, root for red, wode for blue, and the steady hands of your mother and aunt, who have been preparing your bridal clothing since your teeth came in crooked. Mainstream historical fact, betrothed women did, in many regions, wear their hair in specific ways to signal their status. Unmarried, your hair could be worn loose at festivals. Once betrothed, it was usually braided and wrapped, often covered with a light veil or coif, sometimes adorned with ribbons or tiny stitched charms to ward off jealous spirits and suspicious neighbors. Your sleeves, surprisingly, are the stars of your ensemble. They're long, flowing, and just embroidered enough to say, "Someone legally wants to marry me." Some girls wear little tokens tied around their upper arm, a woven band from their future husband's family, a strip of cloth in his house's color, or a miniature pouch containing rosemary, cloves, and a pinch of something the village healer calls moon salt. You never ask. It smells vaguely like burnt toast. If you're a little wealthier, marrying up you might have a girdle. No, not that kind. A belt, made of braided cord or leather, often with a pouch for herbs or a single lucky coin. Some brides even wear keys, symbolizing their new role as mistress of a household. You, however, are still trying to keep track of the one spoon everyone keeps borrowing. Your mother spends an entire week hemming your best tunic, which is blue not because it's your favorite color, it isn't, but because blue is the Virgin, Mary's color, and she's hoping some of that holy energy rubs off. She also adds a stitched line of tiny green vines around the neckline, which is supposed to represent growth, fertility, not making a fool of yourself in front of the parish priest. Fringe tidbit: some regions practiced pinning the sleeve, where a suitor would offer a decorative pin or a brooch to attach to the bride's sleeve, symbolizing affection and more practically helping keep the thing from falling in soup. In one very confusing tale, a man gifted his betrothed a whole sleeve. Just one. No explanation. Historians still argue whether it was meant as a joke, a scandal, or just bad tailoring. Even your shoes get a makeover. You borrow your cousin's best pair, which have only one hole in the sole and sport little stitched birds near the toes. Birds, you're told, bring good luck, unless they're crows or owls, or anything that poops in the middle of your wedding feast. But the true mark of your betrothed status isn't anything you wear, it's how people treat you. If the local girls stop asking if you want to dance at festivals and start asking how, you'll decorate your hearth. Older women invite you to sit beside them during gatherings, offering quiet advice about life, marriage, and why you should always keep dried mint under your pillow. You feel both seen and swaddled in expectation. Everyone's eyes lingered just a little longer when you walk past. The baker's wife nods approvingly at your braided hair. The butcher's apprentice stumbles over his words when handing you meat, suddenly aware that you are no longer eligible, no longer a maybe. Of course, fashion among nobles is another beast entirely. If you were highborn, your betrothal wardrobe might include imported velvet, gold-threaded embroidery, and enough lace to snare a boar. Ladies in castles often wore circlets, delicate metal bands with tiny gemstones, and mantles lined with fur, preferably not shedding. And don't forget the hinnon, the con-shaped hat that made it look like you were about to launch into orbit. Excellent for posture. It's terrible in wind. For you, though, it's about simple beauty. Clean lines. Freshly scrubbed hands. A scent of lavender if you can spare the flowers. You don't need to dazzle, just need to look like someone who can. Bake bread, bear children, and not cause too much trouble at family gatherings. That said, you do sneak in a touch of rebellion. A stitch of red thread hidden in your hem, a small seashell tied into your belt cord, gifted by your friend whose brother once traveled to the coast. It's nothing anyone would notice. But to you, it means something. It says, I'm still me, underneath the wool, the braids, and the future. And when Edwin sees you, Riley sees you, in your betrothal garb for the first time, he blushes. Doesn't say a word. Just nods, and then promptly trips over a bucket. Romance, medieval edition, you smooth your sleeves. You adjust your belt. You feel transformed a little. Like you've stepped into a new skin that itches slightly, but also fits. And that's the magic of it. You're not just wearing clothes, you're wearing a story. One that's only just beginning. The night before your wedding is not a wild party with wine fountains and awkward toasts, no string lights, no DJ, no bachelorette sashes. What you get is ... nuns. Okay? Not always literal nuns, but definitely a group of older women, often from the church. Sometimes just your most spiritual aunts whose mission is to prepare your soul and your scalp for matrimony. And this means a sacred ritual known as the bridal vigil. You begin the evening in your family's home, surrounded by women who've seen more weddings than you've had hot meals. They sit around you in a semicircle, each with a task. One combs your hair delicately, unless she's your cousin Marta, which case it's like being dethistled. One anoints your wrists with oil, and one is humming a hymn under her breath, like she's warding off evil spirits with sound. Mainstream historical. Fact. The bridal vigil was real and varied greatly depending on region and social status. Among Christian communities in medieval Europe, especially from the 12th century onward, it was common for brides to spend the night before their wedding in reflection, prayer, and purification rituals. Think of it as spiritual exfoliation with more holy water. You're dressed in a plain white shiftnot. Your wedding clothes. Not yet. This garment is simple, symbolic. It represents purity, humility, and the fact that every other piece of your clothing is being guarded by your mother so you don't get any soot on it. Someone has lit a bundle of herbs, sage, thyme, a little rosemary. The smell is oddly comforting, though it also makes your eyes water. You're not entirely convinced it isn't just to mask the scent of wet wool and stress. One of the women starts brushing out your hair, counting strokes aloud 40 times, one for each day Jesus spent in the desert. The symbolism is thick tonight. Another dips her fingers into rose water and dabs it behind your ears, murmuring something in Latin that sounds serious, though she might just be repeating a fish stew recipe. Here's your quirky fringe tidbit. In parts of medieval Germany, there was a tradition called the hair blessing, where brides' hair would be braided while older women sang low, rhythmic songs meant to bind luck into the strands. Some even tucked coins, charms, or tiny silver pins into the braids for protection, lest the bride had lice, in which case they made polite excuses and handed her an herbal salve. You're not allowed to be alone tonight. The idea is that unmarried spirits, meaning you're vulnerable to temptation, demonic interference, or cold feet. So you're surrounded, cocooned in warmth and women's voices. Even if one of them keeps snoring mid-prayer, you're also not allowed to eat too much. You're given a modest supper, barley porridge, some bread, maybe a boiled egg if the chickens were generous. Not exactly a feast, but you wouldn't want to be bloated for tomorrow. No one wants to faint halfway through the vows because of too much turnip soup at one point. The priest's wife drops by to offer you a candle. She tells you to keep it burning all night, symbolizing the light of faith and also somewhat ominously your eternal bond. You hold it carefully, hoping it doesn't drip wax on your shift. The candle is beautiful, beeswax, and wrapped with a red ribbon. You'll carry it to the church tomorrow. You will not, as your little brother suggests. Use it to roast chestnuts. You nervous? Someone asks. You don't answer? Not out loud, but inside? Your stomach is fluttering like a lark in a sack? You're about to become a wife. Tomorrow, forever. You barely know what that means, historians. Still argue whether these rituals were comforting or coercive. Was the bridal vigil a peaceful rite of passage? Or a subtle reinforcement of patriarchal control, reminding young women of their duty, their purity, their place? Either way, here you are. Hair blessed, body anointed, heart pounding. Later, as the fire dies down and most of the women drift off into half-sleep, you lie on your pallet, the candle flickering beside you. One older woman, your gretante, perhaps leans in and whispers a single sentence. Marriage is the longest fast you'll ever keep. Then she snores. You think about your future husband, about the life ahead. The way he looked at you during the last feast, the callus on his thumb from scythe work. The way he always stands with one foot slightly turned like he's about to leave the room. You don't know if you'll love him. You don't know if he'll be kind, but you know you'll try, because that's what people do. You fall asleep to the sound of crackling embers and the weight of history resting gently on your chest. Tomorrow, you become a wife. You wake up before the sun, not because you're excited, though maybe there's a sliver of that somewhere deep under the dread, but because someone just started banging a ladle against a pot and yelling up bride. It's your day. Your mother, naturally, the air is cold. The fire's long gone out, and your toes find the floor like they're hunting for frostbite. But no matter today, you're getting married, so you start the morning like any good medieval bride, by standing very still while your aunt rubs your elbows with rose water and mutters about how goosebumps are unbecoming. First things first, beer. For breakfast. Mainstream fact. In medieval Europe, it was totally normal to drink small beer first thing in the morning. It wasn't strong, but it was safer than the water and gave just enough energy to deal with what was coming next. Which in your case includes 30 relatives, 7 chickens, and a man trying to put up bunting made of dried flower garlands. And failing, you sit on a stool while 3 women get to work dressing you. One pulls your wedding shift over your head, another laces the bodice, a third adjusts your veil so it doesn't fall over your face like a depressed ghost. The whole thing smells faintly of lavender and anxiety. It's the nicest thing you've ever worn. White linen, carefully pressed with a belt woven from threads, dyed with madder root. It's a fringe of embroidery at the hem, says God, keep this union. Or maybe keep us from embarrassment. Your cousin stitched it in her Latin. Is questionable. There's no makeup per se, but they do rub a bit of egg white on your cheeks for shine. You blink furiously to keep from crying mostly, because someone is pinning your headdress a little too enthusiastically. The house is chaos. Your father's trying to find the marriage contract. It's in the flower jar. Naturally, your brother is chasing a runaway goose, and 2 guests have already arrived and started eating the ceremonial bread. The bread you were supposed to carry in, typical fringe tradition in parts of rural England. It was customary for the bride to eat a spoonful of honey before the ceremony, for sweetness and fertility. You're handed a small wooden spoon and asked to close your eyes while someone says a prayer. You nearly gag. It's wildly floral and probably has bee legs in it. But you smile and nod like it's divine nectar. Then comes the blessing. Your mother stands before you, places her hands on your shoulders, and says a short prayer. Part warning. May your hearth be warm, your husband patient, and your roof not leak until at least winter. Outside. The village is waking. Up. Bells ring soft, uneven chimes that let everyone know something big is happening. Your wedding day isn't private. It's public, noisy, and more or less unavoidable. Everyone in the village is coming, not just family and friends, but neighbors, random shepherds. And that one man who shows up to everything and claims he's related to everyone on his mother's side. You're led outside with great ceremony, which is to say, your cousins stop. Fighting long enough to form a line, someone starts singing badly, and an old woman throws rosemary sprigs at your feet as you pass. This is the walk to the church. It's not far, but it feels eternal. Your shoes pinch, your veil keeps catching on brambles. And a small dog insists on walking exactly in your path. The route has been swept, or at least trampled into submission, and decorated with ribbons, flowers, and the occasional turnip. No. One's quite sure why. Along the way, people shout blessings, wave bits of cloth, and give advice you didn't ask for. Keep your firewood dry. Never sleep with your feet toward the door. Don't trust a man who whistles. Historians still debate whether these processions were formalized or spontaneous. Some accounts describe elegant parades with musicians and standard bearers. Others read more like a small riot involving flower petals and geese. Yours is somewhere in between. A lute is being strummed poorly, and someone brought cymbals. They should not have brought cymbals. You spot Edwin up ahead, already at the church, looking simultaneously terrified and slightly damp. He's wearing his best tunic dyed brown, the new belt that still has the shop tag on it, or the medieval equivalent. A dangling thread with a tiny wax seal. He waves you nod. This is romance now. There's a brief delay at the church door, where a confused goat has wandered in and is now munching on a pew garland. Your uncle shoos it out while muttering about omens. You step inside, finally, and the cool stone air hits you like a splash of holy water. Candles flicker. A handful of doves flap overhead, recently released and extremely lost. The priest smiles, gestures you forward, and the ceremony is about to begin. You're still adjusting your veil when someone hands you a small bouquet, not flowers, but a bundle of herbs and grain tied with twine. Symbolic, of course. Everything today is symbolic. The flowers would come tomorrow if it doesn't rain, and if the pigs haven't eaten them. You take a breath. The moment has arrived. And as you stand there in your linen and lace and slightly damp shoes, you think, this is happening. This is real. And you've only tripped once. You're standing outside the church, blinking in the soft torchlight and holding a bundle of grain when someone announces it's time to walk, not stroll walk, process, parade, move with purpose and just enough solemnity to convince people. This isn't just a Tuesday. It's walk about with 40% of your closest relatives and one goat still trying to rejoin the crowd. The walk to the church is its own ceremony. It's loud, chaotic, and oddly sweet. People emerge from homes and lean from windows. A small boy throws petals. Or maybe they're beet tops. Either way, it's festive. You've been told to keep your chin up, to smile gently, and to walk slowly, even if your left shoe is filled with what might be a pebble or a very determined acorn. Your aunt adjusts your veil every 6 steps. Your cousin keeps trying to sing a bridal song that may or may not be about a goose with excellent morals. Mainstream historical fact: in medieval village weddings, the procession from the bride's home to the church was a major social event. The route was often decorated. The bride and groom walked with family and friends, and symbolic items like garlands, bread, or torches were carried or displayed. It was one part celebration, one part public declaration. It's one part opportunity for the town gossip to gather fresh material. Your father carries a staff. It's not because he needs it to walk, but because it's traditional meant to signify guidance, leadership, and perhaps the threat of whacking anyone who suggests the bride's dowry wasn't impressive. Your brother follows behind him, holding a jug of beer that's for ceremonial pouring, though it's already suspiciously light, and behind them, a small donkey. Not ceremonial. It just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But now it's part of the wedding and frankly pulling a lot of focus. You and Edwin meet just outside the church door. He looks like he's been holding his breath for a full hour. He's shaved, or at least scraped his face enough to look mildly less like a sheepdog. You nod at each other. It's not swooning romance, but it's something. The priest welcomes you with open arms and a slight squint. He's old, a little deaf, and still recovering from the time someone tried to baptize a chicken. But he's kind, and he knows what he's doing. There's a brief moment of confusion. When your cousin stumbles on the church step and knocks over a small pot of rosemary, the scent fills the entrance. People politely pretend not to notice. Inside, the church is candlelit and cool, stone walls echoing every sound. A few birds flap nervously in the rafters left over from a solstice festival, you're told.
Altar
Is decorated with wheat sheaves and a tapestry of Saint Margaret, the patron saint of childbirth and dragons. The symbolism is not lost on you. Fringe tidbit: in certain parts of Scandinavia and the British Isles, it was considered good luck to trip on your way into the church, symbolizing humility, or the idea that you were falling into marriage. You're not sure that's true, but you nearly eat dirt on the steps anyway, so we'll call it traditional. You and Edwin walk up the aisle together, side by side. This isn't a bride gives away moment. It's a partnership in the making moment, or at least that's how it's explained. You're still very aware of how tight your belt is, and how itchy the back of your neck feels under the veil. The front row is a tapestry of relatives. Your grandmother is mouthing every word of the liturgy. Edwin's uncle is already asleep. Your youngest cousin is attempting to eat a candle. Everything's going perfectly. The priest begins the service in Latin. You understand perhaps every 10th word, most of which sound vaguely like amen or sin. You nod and try not to lock your knees. The ceremony is short, but dense with layers, blessings, psalms, little bursts of incense that make you sneeze. Edwin's hand brushes yours. He looks as nervous as you feel, but when he says his vows haltingly, softly it feels real, like he means it. And suddenly, your heart flutters in a way that's half terror, half something else. Historians still argue whether vows were always spoken aloud by both parties, or if, in some regions, only the groom needed to recite them fully. What's consistent, though, is that vows were binding. This wasn't symbolic. As once said in Witness, there was no going back, no annulments, no take-backs. Unless, of course, one of you turned out to be a secretly ordained bishop, or already married to someone else. Both happened. More than once. Repeat your vows, your voice surprisingly steady. The words are ancient, sacred, and heavy. You promise to be faithful, to obey, to keep house and hearth, and to stand by his side. You say them because you must. You say them because everyone you love is watching, but also you say them because somehow it feels right. A hush falls as the priest blesses your union. Then comes the final part of this sacred walk, the sealing of the vows. The kiss. It's brief. Awkward. Edwin tastes vaguely of barley and nerves. But it's there. Kiss before God, before family, before history. And just like that, you're no longer betrothed, you're married. The donkey brays. Everyone cheers. There's a strange moment right after you've been married where everything feels ... paused. You're standing in front of the altar. Officially someone's spouse now, and the priest is nodding approvingly, like he's just completed a very complex recipe. There's no dramatic swell of music, no sudden rainfall, no doves dramatically exploding into flight, though the one in the rafters does fall off its perch with an undignified flap. Instead, there's a silence. One of those thick, echoing silences that only medieval stone churches can produce, where even a cough bounces off the walls like a drumbeat. And then someone sneezes, and the spell breaks. The priest steps forward, picks up a chunk of wax, and begins the legal part. Because yes, getting married isn't just about vows, it's about paperwork. or, well, parchment work. Mainstream historical. Fact, in many medieval Christian ceremonies, especially post-12th century, the moment the vows were spoken and witnessed usually outside or just inside the church was when the marriage became canonically valid. But civil and legal recognition often still required documentation, witness signatures, official seals, and sometimes a record kept by the local lord, especially if property or inheritance was involved. So now comes the seal. The big seal, not a literal animal, though that would be incredible. No, this is a lump of wax, a carved stamp, and a heavy thunk that binds your fate in bureaucratic amber. Edwin signs. You sign. If you're literate, not, you just make a marquant X, a cross, or your family's symbol. You choose a little fish, which feels appropriate considering you still feel like one caught in a net. Then the priest presses the seal into the wax, leaving behind the impression of the church's sigil. It looks like a haloed sheep or possibly a concerned goat. Either way, it's official. Fringe tidbit? In certain medieval towns, they held witness parades where, after the vows, the bride and groom would be paraded around the church grounds by two witnesses to publicly affirm the legality of the union. This was partly ceremonial, partly practical because if someone objected, now was definitely the time to yell about it. Fortunately, no one objects. Although your cousin does trip and nearly knock over a candle, which might have been interpreted as divine protest in a more dramatic village. Now that the ink is drying and the seal is cooling, it's time for the final act of the ceremony. The kiss. Not the quick peck from earlier, no. This is the sealing kiss. The one meant to bind not just the words, but the whole contract. It's not legally required, but it's tradition. And in the Middle Ages, tradition is basically law. With a hat on, so you and Edwin stand before the crowd, the priest nods and someone in the back starts humming. You lean forward, the kiss is awkward. You bonk noses, steps on your foot, you both laugh, which makes it better. You taste faintly of ale and panic. You think this could work? Maybe? Probably. Everyone cheers again. Someone rings a bell. A child claps as if you've just performed a magic trick. The priest mumbles something about the sanctity of union and ushers you aside to make room for the next service. It's St. Mildred's feast day, and the parishioners are already lining up with pies. You step outside, and the light hits you differently. You're not just you anymore, you're a wife. Your name is still yours, but now it's woven with his. Your fate, your home, your daily bread, they're all shared now. And legally, spiritually, socially, ... You're part of something. Larger than yourself? Historians still debate whether this moment felt joyful or terrifying for most medieval brides. There are diary scraps, poems, and secondhand letters hinting at both. But for you, it feels like standing at the edge of a forest. The path ahead is mysterious, a little muddy, but full of possibility. Then comes the receiving line. Not formal, just a string of people coming up to you and saying things like, well, done, he's a lucky lad, and don't forget to salt the stew before boiling. You smile until your cheeks hurt. Someone gives you a chunk of honeycomb. Someone else offers a very heavy turnip. A third person tries to sell you a goat for newlywed luck. You thank everyone. You thank them again. You feel dazed, overwhelmed, but not unhappy. The church bell rings one last time. The priest gives you a final blessing and hands you a little scrap of parchment with a prayer. You'll keep it in your shoe for a week, as tradition demands. No one really knows why.
Out.
Something about warding off blisters and bad omens. You walk. Back through the village, this time side by side with Edwin. People throw petals, or maybe dried peas, depending on availability. Someone sets off a small firecracker made from dried bark and frightens a dog. A lute player follows behind, playing a song that may or may not be about cows falling in love. You and Edwin look at each other. You laugh. The legal part is done. The spiritual part is done. Now it's time to eat like you've never eaten before. The walk to the feast is louder, looser, and more chaotic than the procession to the church. You're no longer a bride-to-be or a married woman now. The entire village is determined to celebrate like it's their own wedding. You've barely taken 3 steps from the chapel door when someone slips a cup of wine into your hand and yells, "To the bride," closely followed by, "To the bread," which might have been a misheard toast or just general carb enthusiasm. The air smells of firewood, herbs, and anticipation. Children run ahead to shout the news to anyone who didn't make it to the church. "They did it," one boy announces triumphantly, while a girl behind him adds, "and they didn't fall over." Which, honestly, was a valid concern. Your feet are already starting to ache. But no matter. The real work of the day is about to begin, because it's time for the feast. Mainstream historical fact? Medieval wedding feasts were community affairs. Even among peasants, a wedding meal was a big deal. Guests brought food, drink, sometimes tables and benches, and in exchange they expected to eat, drink, and revel. It wasn't just a partyette. It was a public display of abundance and hospitality. For nobles, these feasts could stretch for days. For commoners, a hearty evening of music, meat, and merriment did the job just fine. You arrive at the feasting field, really just a flattened patch of earth near the village green. Long planks rest on barrels to make tables. Benches, stools, and upturned crates form seating. Someone's hung garlands of dried flowers between 2 trees. And your uncle's lute group, 3 lutes and a jug player, is tuning up with a truly painful version of Come Dance. Fair swine. The food begins to arrive. First, the bread round. Loaves with decorative scoring, warm from the ovens. Then a procession of meats, roast mutton, boiled beef, something that used to be a bird, but is now more seasoning than substance. There's a pie that wobbles ominously. A tray of eels arranged, like a decorative fence. And at the center of the main table, a roasted boar's head with a sprig of rosemary in its snout and a slightly smug expression. You're ushered to the place of honor, sitting between Edwin, who still hasn't figured out where to put his elbows, on your new mother-in-law, who is very polite and also keeps moving the salt away from you every time you reach for it. Fringe tidbit, there are records of bride ale celebrations gatherings where beer was brewed specifically. For the wedding, often by the bride herself or her family, guests were expected to pay a small coin for each mug, effectively helping fund the feast. You didn't brew the ale yourself, but someone's calling it Beth's Best anyway. Your face is painted on the barrel with charcoal. You've never looked more like a startled potato. The first toast is raised. "To love," someone cries. "To land," adds another. "To not dying in childbirth," says your grattant, who has no filter and 3 husbands' worth of experience. The music begins. A lively reel played slightly off-key, but with so much enthusiasm you barely notice. People dance. People spill things. Someone drops a whole meat pie into a basket of herbs, declares it blessed, and eats it anyway. And then the games begin. A man arrives dressed as a Bareilly, just fur pelts, and a carved wooden mask. He grunts theatrically and chases children. Around while they scream with delight, a woman juggles apples. A pair of minstrels sings a love ballad that starts romantic and ends with the bride turning into a fish. You don't question it. Historians still argue whether these types of antics were part of structured ritual or just peasant improvisation at its finest. What's agreed upon is this: wedding feasts were theatrical, joyous, and ever so slightly unruly. At one point, someone passes around a truth stick, a decorated branch used in local games where guests must share a memory or give marriage. Advice when it lands in their lap. One old man says, "Always sleep with your socks on." A woman adds, "Don't stir stew counterclockwise." Edwin's uncle loudly proclaims, "Let her win, always," and is immediately elbowed by his wife. The food keeps coming. Berries soaked in honey, cheese wrapped in leaves, an experimental pudding that causes mild panic when it turns purple. Halfway through dinner, you and Edwin share your first real moment of quiet as you eat side by side. He hands you a piece of bread with the crust carved into a heart. You pretend not to notice, but your smile betrays you. By dusk, the candles and torches are lit. The air hums with laughter, music, and the occasional hiccup. You're tired, full, and pleasantly dazed. There's even a moment where you almost Forget what's next almost, because you haven't reached the bedding ceremony yet. But for now, just for now, you're allowed to feast like you've just been sold into matrimony with roast pork and warm wine. And for all its strangeness, its sticky-fingered joy and goat-induced chaos, it's not a bad way to start a marriage. Just when you think the feast is winding down. When your uncle has finally stopped reenacting his infamous 3IL juggling incident, and the lute players have drifted into a melancholic ballad about a girl who falls in love with a ghost, you realize things are only just warming up, because now it's time for the real fun. The games, the songs. Scandal, it starts innocently enough. Someone begins clapping, then someone else joins in. A boy with a whistle, probably. Not invited starts blowing a tune that might be Greensleeves or might be just his impression of a startled bird. Either way, people are rising from their seats and dragging each other into the open space near the fire. You, being the bride, are not allowed to sit. You are the ceremonial center of this delightful storm. People come up, one after another, to offer you congratulations wrapped in riddles, advice disguised as jokes, and on one memorable occasion, a single pickled onion for fertility. Mainstream historical fact: wedding games were a key part of the celebration, especially among common folk. They included dancing, riddles, playful competitions, and sometimes ... a touch of raunch. A well-timed body song was practically tradition, even in the most pious villages. These songs weren't necessarily vulgar. They were suggestive. Cheeky, the medieval equivalent of someone winking at you through a limerick. Your new cousin. Edric, every medieval family has at least 3 Edrics. Starts a guess the groom. Game where men put on veils and do exaggerated bride impressions. One man actually fools you, mostly because he's wearing your aunt's apron and has a very convincing falsetto. The dancing gets faster. Someone breaks out a tambourine that hasn't been tuned since before the last plague wave. A young man spins so enthusiastically that he falls directly into a bowl of stewed leeks and rises triumphantly with one stuck to his forehead. And then, the minstrel steps forward, a real one. He wasn't hired, he just shows up at every wedding. Within a 20-mile radius, and insists on performing. No one knows where he lives. Some say he sleeps in haystacks. Others claim he's a disgraced monk with a lute and a heart full of mischief. He sings a ballad about 2 lovers separated by a river, reunited by a floating loaf of bread, and then cursed by a talking fox. It's equal parts romantic and utterly confusing, but the crowd eats it up. Especially the part where the fox marries the miller's daughter and inherits Windmill. You and Edwin are now holding hands. Not because of any grand romantic gesture, but because people keep trying to drag you into increasingly bizarre dances. And linking fingers is the only way to avoid being separated in the madness. Fringe tidbit, some medieval weddings included, a game where the bride's shoe was stolen and ransomed back to her. The thief, often a child, would hide it, and the groom would have to perform a silly task to retrieve it, sing a song, do a little dance, or recite a rhyme. Tonight, your shoe disappears for 10 minutes and is returned filled with walnuts. You thank the child responsible with a stern nod and a slice of pie. There are moments of tenderness, too. An old woman sings a lullaby her grandmother taught her, one that's supposed to bring peace to a new marriage. The melody is haunting. Close your eyes for a moment and let it wash over you. Edwin squeezes your hand. Then the scandal arrives. Because what is a wedding without one? Your great-uncle, who has had one too many cups of elderberry wine, attempts to kiss the bride. Not maliciously, he just insists it's customary. Your aunt intervenes with a wooden spoon. The crowd howls. Somewhere in the back, someone starts chanting, again, until the minstrel changes songs and saves everyone's dignity. Historians still argue whether these slightly indecent traditions, drunken toasts, bawdy songs, flirtations, were tolerated parts of village weddings or frowned upon and only present at the rowdier affairs. But based on your experience, it's definitely part of the fun, and likely why the priest retired early. By the time the moon is high, the guests are sprawled across benches, cheeks red from laughter and wine. The fire crackles. Someone's asleep in a wheelbarrow. Another's arguing with a chicken about theological matters. It's that beautiful, chaotic twilight of the feast where everything feels magical and nothing quite makes sense, and you're floating through it. Dazed, glowing, exhausted, married, the day is nearly over. But one final tradition remains. The bedding, you and Edwin exchange a look. Not one of fear, not even embarrassment, just awareness. Because soon, all of this joy will give way to the most bizarre tradition yet. One that involves candles, singing, and far too many people in the room. But for now, someone hands you a warm tart. The music softens into a slow tune, and the firelight flickers across Edwin's face. He looks at you not like a boy who tripped over a goat last week, but like a man who just realized he married. Person with excellent cheekbones and more wit than she lets on. You smile and take another bite of tart. You thought the day had peaked with the eel pie and the minstrel's fox ballad. You were wrong. Because now, dear listener, it's time for the grand finale of medieval matrimony. The bedding ceremony, and no, it's not what you're thinking. Or rather, it is. But it's also weirder. The fire's low now. Guests are yawning, hiccuping, slipping into drunken naps on hay bales. And just as you think someone might suggest calling it a night, your cousin stands up on a bench and yells, "Time to bed the bride." Cheers erupt. Somewhere, someone strikes a drum. Someone else starts clapping. Edwin looks at you like a man who's just remembered he left the turnip stew burning at home. You meanwhile feel your ears go hot enough to bake bread. Mainstream historical fact? The bedding ceremony was very real in medieval Europox, many cultures and classes. It served as both a symbolic and literal confirmation that the marriage was consummated. Sometimes it was a private affair with just a few witnesses. Other times, entire wedding parties followed the couple to the bedchamber, sang songs, and stayed until they were convinced things had officially begun. Subtlety was not the vibe. You're led by a gaggle of women laughing, singing slightly tipsy women who remove your veil, unlace your bodice, and wrap you in what is basically a long linen nightshirt that smells faintly of lavender and possibly moths. It's not meant to be seductive. It's meant to say, this is a new stage of life. Please stop adjusting the collar so tightly, thank you very much. Meanwhile, Edwin is being prepared in a similar ritual. His friends remove his boots. One gets flung into the rafters unbuckle his belt and shove a cup of ale into his hand, while offering last-minute wisdom like, don't fall asleep too fast, and mind the headboard it squeaks. You're marched to the marriage bed, which is, let's be generous, sturdy. It's been cleaned. It's been blessed. It's been covered in fresh straw wool blankets and the weight of 1,000 expectations. Then comes the actual ceremony. Everyone gathers around. Everyone. Your parents, your new in-laws, the lute player, the guy with the talking chicken. There's a song, a very specific, very old song about joining under heaven's eyes that includes more rhyming words. For union than you thought possible, you and Edwin climb into bed. Fully clothed, the crowd cheers, someone tosses flowers, someone else drops a meat pie. The priest says a blessing. And then ... they leave. Well, most of them. A few stragglers try to linger, citing tradition or curiosity. One is your cousin. You throw a pillow at him. He takes the hint. Historians still debate how much of the bedding ceremony was for show, and how much was ... follow through. In noble families, a noblewoman might sit at the end of the bed as witness. Among peasants, it was often more symbolic, leading the couple to bed, tucking them in, and then leaving them the heck alone. Some traditions even had the best man sleep in the room to guard against wait for it witches. It's nothing like romance under the watchful eye of anti-witch supervision. In your case, the room eventually clears. The door creaks shut. The candle burns low, and there you are, you and Edwin, married in bed. Alone, it's quiet, really quiet. You hear an owl. You hear someone snoring outside the window. You hear your own heart thudding in your chest like a tambourine with stage fright. Edwin looks at you. You look at him. Hi, says you laugh, because it's absurd and sweet. It's exactly what you needed. There's no pressure. There's no sudden passion. Just two teenagers, let's be honest, lying in a bed that smells like thyme and old wool, wondering what exactly comes next. He says, I'm nervous. You say, me too. Talk. You ask what his favorite food is. Stewed apples. You tell him you're scared of horses. Says he's scared of your grandmother. You both laugh, and maybe eventually you fall asleep. Or maybe not. But here's the thing. The moment doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be honest. That's the real tradition. Because tomorrow, people will ask. People will speculate. People will want proof. But tonight, here in this candlelit room with scratchy sheets and nerves stitched together with soft words, you are just two people trying to figure it out. And somehow, it's more romantic than any Fox ballad or Boar's Head centerpiece. Morning light creeps across the floor in long golden lines, sneaking between the shutter slats like a nosy neighbor.
Ow.
You blink awake. Your mouth is dry. Your limbs are tangled in linen and the faint scent of sheep tallow candles. Next to you, Edwin is snoring softly. One arm draped across his face like he's shielding himself from responsibility. And then you remember, you're married. You were marched to bed in front of half the village. You were serenaded, tucked in, and told, make it count. You don't even know what that was supposed to mean. Your first thought is not of romance or even regret. It's, please don't let anyone barge in with breakfast before I've had. A moment to process. Too late, there's a knock light. Polite, and then the door creaks open. Your mother, your aunt, and at least one person who is probably not related to you in any legal sense, come in. Arms full of fabric, baskets, and what looks like a ceremonial sheet. Yes, that sheet. Mainstream historical fact, the morning. After the wedding, some communities expected evidence of consummation, traditionally in the form of a bloodied bedsheet. It was hung outside as proof of the bride's virginity and the marriage's legitimacy. In noble circles, this practice was highly ritualized. Among peasants, it was more performative than anything, but no less awkward. You and Edwin both sit up, startled, and try not to look like two people who just had the weirdest night of their lives. The room is suddenly full of voices, hands straightening blankets, someone fluffing pillows unnecessarily. Did everything go well, your aunt? Asks entirely too loudly. You nod. Edwin nods. Someone gives a thumbs up. Then comes the presentation of the sheet. Two women like medieval lab technicians lift it up, inspect it, and nod solemnly. There's a quiet, tense moment. You're not sure what they're looking for, but they find something they like. One of them claps. The other says, praise. B, and hands it off to a young boy who sprints outside with it like it's the Olympic torch. You cover your face. Edwin groans into the mattress. Fringe tidbit? In some villages, the post-wedding sheet wasn't just waved around, it was paraded through the town. It's hung from a window, or even added to a bridal dowry chest as a keepsake. In other, more skeptical regions, there were rumors of women pricking their finger or smuggling in chicken blood to ensure results. Historians still debate how often this actually happened, and whether anyone was really fooled. Outside, you can already hear cheering. Bells ring. Someone blows a horn. The sheet has been seen. The crowd is pleased. Inside, you're offered a bowl of warm porridge, 2 boiled eggs, and a cup of watered wine. The breakfast of victorious newlyweds. Your aunt whispers, eat up, love. You've got a long life ahead, and pinches your cheek with a slightly terrifying gleam in her eye. Edwin tries to thank everyone, ends up accidentally proposing to your mother in formal Latin. She pats his hand and says, no thank you, dear. Once is enough. After everyone leaves, and they do, eventually, though only after commenting on the quality of the sheet, the smell of the room. Whether you'll name your first child after Great-Uncle Baldric and Edwin collapse into a shared fit of laughter. Exhausted, embarrassed, relieved laughter. Historians still argue whether these sheet rituals were more about enforcing moral norms or just a dramatic way to turn private milestones into public entertainment. Either way, they sure knew how to make waking up awkward. The day rolls on. More visitors come. Neighbors drop by with gifts. A pair of wooden spoons. A tiny piglet with a ribbon around its tail. a bundle of rushes for your new floor. People ask you how it feels to be a wife. You say it's like waking up inside a song everyone else is singing too loudly. You try to steal a few quiet moments, just you and Edwin, sitting on the back step with cups of ale, watching chickens peck at the grass. He leans over and whispers, "Do we have to do the sheet thing every time?" You laugh. You tell him no. Probably not. Your feet are still sore from dancing. Your hair is full of wayward flower petals. And your heart? Well, it's uncertain, but also curious. Hopeful. You're not in love, not yet. But you're not unhappy. And that feels like a decent place to begin. Later that afternoon, there's one final round of congratulations from the village elders. They gather, sit in a semicircle, and bestow the married couple with what they call wisdom. Most of it boils down to, don't let your goat sleep in the house. Always check the bucket before milking, and never go to bed angry. Unless your spouse is snoring, in which case, sleep in the barn. They shake your hand. They ruffle Edwin's hair. They leave. And suddenly, the house is quiet again. Just you, Edwin, and the rest of your life. So, this is married life. You wake up the next morning not to the sound of bells or celebratory horns, but to a dripping roof and a rooster having an existential crisis just outside the window. The excitement has cooled. The garlands are wilting. There are still guests asleep in the yard. Now they're more of a landscape feature than anything else. And you are officially a wife. Which, in the medieval world, means your schedule just got a whole lot busier. Today starts with laundry. Not metaphorical laundry. It's literal steaming hot soak carnicles. Pray dasher dash linen dash DOESN. Single quotes, T-shrink laundry. Your mother-in-law hands you a tub and a smile that is somehow both warm and slightly terrifying. You're one of us now, she says. You're not sure if she means family or workforce. Mainstream historical fact? Medieval wives were expected to take over or assist in household management immediately. There was no grace period, no honeymoon phase. The honeymoon, if it existed at all, was a strong ale and a foot massage before bed, followed by helping kill chickens at dawn. Your tasks for the day include stirring the stew, fixing a hem on, Edwin's tunic, chasing the piglet again, pretending you know what you're doing. Fortunately, your new husband seems equally out of his depth. You find him staring at a pile of firewood like it just insulted his lineage. When you ask what he's doing, he replies, trying to remember which logs are the dry ones. You hand him a stick. He beams like you've solved fire itself. The two of you work around each other in awkward, hopeful silence. Every time you pass, he smiles. Every time he smiles, you blush. It's not love.
Not yet.
But it's nice fringe tidbit. Some villages had a tradition called bride sitting, where the new wife would be placed at the hearth for the first meal and symbolically served by her husband, reversing the typical dynamic to show mutual respect. In your case, Edwin brings you a bowl of stew, then promptly trips over a cat and spills half of it in your lap. So does the cat. That afternoon, the village sends more gifts. A wheel of cheese, a broom, a bundle of lavender, and a mysterious package containing 6 turnips, a recipe for fertility porridge, and a note that just says, "Don't ask." You do not ask. You're learning your new home, where the flowers kept, which floorboards creak, which stool is safe, and which one collapses if you look at it wrong. The cupboard smells faintly of dried fish. The bed creaks less if you sleep facing the wall, and you're learning your new family. Your father-in-law is quiet, but nods approvingly every time you carry 2 buckets at once. Your mother-in-law gives unsolicited advice like it's a competitive sport. Your sister-in-law brings over a dead rabbit and says, "I thought you might like a stew challenge." You thank her? You wonder what exactly the challenge is. Historians still argue whether the transition into marriage was harder on young brides or grooms. Both faced new responsibilities, new expectations, and the silent pressure to produce children quickly. But for women, the shift was especially sharp, leaving behind their family, their household rhythms, and often their name. You keep your name, mostly because Edwin says you've had it longer. Seems fair. At night, you sit by the hearth. He carves a spoon his third today. You mend a sock. You exchange exactly 5 words before bed. Good day? Yes. Yes. Night. It's enough. Somewhere a dog barks. Somewhere else your brother is probably telling the story of your wedding feast for the 4th time. You can hear the village settling into its night hum-soft wind. Extant cow. The occasional thud of something falling in a barn. You lie in bed and think, this isn't what they sang about in ballads. There's no thunderclap, no grand epiphany. Just 2 people trying. 1 stitch, 1 spoon, 1 turnip stew at a time, and maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Now that the veil's folded away, leftover eel pie has hardened into something geological, and the village has moved on to gossiping about someone else's goat, your new married life settles into a rhythm, or more accurately, a bumpy, cabbage-scented, rooster-interrupted waltz of endless domesticity. Today, for instance, is a visit day. The door creaks open with the first of many guest appearances. Neighbors, extended family, that one woman who's never officially introduced herself but seems to know everything about you. Everyone wants to drop by. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone brings a gift. Mainstream historical fact. Post-wedding visits were common in many parts of medieval Europe. Newlyweds received family, neighbors, and local friends over several days, partly to offer congratulations, partly to reinforce alliances, and partly because there was often food and gossip involved. These visits also allowed the community to assess how the couple was settling in. Your first visitor is your cousin Elric, who bursts in with a grin and hands you a basket of eggs and a riddle. The eggs are fine. The riddle's something about a fox, a nun, and a barrel is less helpful. Next is your new aunt by marriage, who eyes your hearth critically before announcing it could use more saints. She promptly hangs a wooden medallion of Saint Dymphna above the mantel and nods, like she's single-handedly secured your emotional well-being. Edwin handles the guests with the kind of slow, polite patience usually reserved for rain delays and wandering cows. He says little. He refills mugs. He occasionally places a reassuring hand on your back when someone lobs an especially loaded question like, so, any signs yet? Meaning babies, of course. Always babies. Fringe tidbit. In some villages, there was a tradition called the first week's blessing, where each visitor brought not just food or advice, but a line of poetry or a blessing rhyme, often passed down through generations. You now have a list scrawled on the wall that includes gems like, may your roof never fall and your stool never crack. May your bread rise high and your cheese not mold. And the ever-classic, may your cow be fat and your sleep be uninterrupted. You laugh out loud at that one. There's gossip too, naturally. As people sip ale and nibble on your slightly scorched oatcakes, the room becomes an impromptu village newsletter. Apparently, old Bert has lost his pig again. The blacksmith's daughter might be talking too much to the new friar. And the miller's wife has started growing something mysterious in her herb patch. That definitely isn't parsley. Everyone also has thoughts about the wedding. She looked radiant, they say, which is usually followed by a pause, and then something like, though the veil could have been longer, or the goose dance was a bit much. You smile. You thank them. You make mental notes about who brought decent cheese and who gets decaf ale next time. There's one visitor who stands out, a woman named Marin, who you've only met once before. She sits quietly, watches the room, and hands you a small bundle of cloth with a single line for your hope chest. Inside is a piece of lace, a dried flower, and a tiny carved button shaped like a heart. You blink. She nods. No words needed. After the 4th guest leaves, you finally get to sit. Your feet throb. Your brain feels pickled. Edwin hands you a slice of bread with honey and says, you survived? You raise an eyebrow. Barely. Historians still argue whether these post-wedding visits were genuinely supportive or subtly judgmental. Maybe both. Either way, they were community at work, checking in, showing up, making sure you weren't accidentally trying to churn butter with a chamber pot. The next morning brings even more visitors. One delivers a small pot of jam and lingers just long enough to scan your midsection with a look that suggests she has X-ray vision. Another brings a poem that rhymes wheat with feet and says it was written by a cousin who once courted a nun. Eventually you start to enjoy it. The rhythm, the ritual, it's the odd, cozy chaos of shared space and inherited wisdom. You learn which guests leave crumbs, which ones steal spoons, and which ones quietly refill your herb jars. You also learn a lot about marriage not from books or prayers, but from the way the old couples bicker with gentle affection, from the stories they tell when they think no one is listening, from the subtle glances exchanged across a crowded room. By the third evening, it's quiet again. It's just you and Edwin. No guests, no gossip. Just a candle flickering, a fire crackling, and the comforting scrape of spoon against bowl. You know, he says, breaking the silence, we make a decent team. You nod. We haven't burned anything for 2 days. He smiles, and in that moment, tired, full, surrounded by the echo of blessings and onion breath, you feel something simple, solid, like maybe, just maybe, this odd little life might grow into something wonderful. It's been a week now, or maybe 10 days. Time in a medieval village flows with the weather, the light, and the chicken cycles. But either way, the honeymoon period, if you could call it that, is over, and now you're well and truly a wife. A medieval one, which means surprise. Your life is 70% housework, 20% livestock avoidance, and 10% wondering if the bread is supposed to smell like that. Today's schedule: wake up before the sun, stoke the hearth, skim the cream, floor with a bundle of twigs that's absolutely seen better days. Check for weasels in the food store, Pete until dead. Mainstream historical fact: the role of a medieval wife, especially among the peasantry, was essentially that of co-manager of the household economy. She was expected to cook, clean, sew, tend the garden, care for children, prepare medicinal remedies, and manage the food stores, all while maintaining social ties and, ideally, not dying of overwork. You start the day with barley porridge and a look of quiet dread as Edwin says, "The pig's out again." You sigh, you retrieve the pig. It bites your sleeve and runs into the neighbor's cabbages. Again, your mornings are now a blur of tasks. You wash linens in icy water that freezes your fingers into little claws. You trim herbs and hang them upside down in the rafters like leafy bats. You try to bake a loaf of bread that doesn't resemble a brick and fail. Your aunt says it's just rustic. And then there's the never-ending presence of your new mother-in-law. She's not cruel, just ... ever present, like mildew. She hovers near the stew pot and murmurs, "You know, when I was a bride, we didn't burn onions." You smile through gritted teeth. "How lucky," you say. Fringe tidbit: some medieval households had a superstition about broom placement. If the broom leaned against the door, it meant the bride was overwhelmed. If it was hidden behind the hearth, it meant she'd had a good day. You hide it behind the hearth around midday, mostly out of spite. But it's not all drudgery. There are small joys, like the moment Edwin surprises you by fixing the broken latch on the window, unprompted. Or when the neighbor girl brings over a ribbon for your hair because you look sad today. Or when you find a perfect egg in the hen's nest and take it as a sign from the universe that maybe, just maybe, you're not entirely failing at this. You're slowly carving out your place in the household. You start a basket for spare thread. You claim a hook by the door for your shawl. You name the kettle. His name is Percival. He whistles when he's ready. Pretend it's a compliment. You also start writing mental letters to your younger self. "Dear past me, stop wishing for adventure. You got married instead. Your body is sore in places you didn't know existed. Your knees ache from kneeling. Your back protests every time you haul a bucket. Your arms, though, getting impressively strong. You flex in secret and feel vaguely empowered. Historians still argue whether medieval peasant wives found fulfillment in domesticity or if they merely endured it. You think the answer is somewhere in between? There's a strange satisfaction in clean floors, warm bread, even when lumpy, and a well-tended fire. It's not glamorous. It's not poetic. But it's something solid, something real. You and Edwin fall into a routine. He works the fields. You manage the hearth. He brings in kindling. You make stew. You swap jokes when no one's listening. You discover you both secretly hate turnips. It's the little things. At night, you sit on the bench by the fire. You don't talk much. Just sit, share a blanket. Share a silence that feels companionable instead of heavy. And sometimes, on good days, you look at each other and think, maybe we've got this. Sure, you're still figuring out the milking schedule. Sure, the cat knocked over the dried sage again. Sure, you accidentally dyed Edwin's best tunic slightly green. But you're learning, you're growing, you're becoming a wife, not just in name, but in rhythm, and in a world where survival is a daily achievement, that's no small thing. By now, you've mastered the basics of wifehood. Keep the fire going. Don't poison the stew. Try not to cry into the laundry. But now comes the real test, figuring out what exactly your husband does all day. Because while you've been elbows deep in barley and broom bristles, Edwin has been mysteriously outworking the land. A phrase so vague it could mean anything from noble toil to napping under a tree. This morning, you decide to follow him. Not sneakily, though, that would be fun, but as a wife with legitimate curiosity and slightly suspicious eyebrows. You tie your shawl, grab a crust of bread, and step into the world of ... husbandry, mainstream historical fact. In a typical medieval household, especially among the peasant class, husbands were responsible for agricultural work, maintaining tools, tending livestock, fulfilling feudal obligations, and occasionally managing trade or taxes. In reality, many of these duties overlapped with the wife's role, and survival required teamwork more than tradition. Edwin greets you with a grin that says, "You're going to regret this." He hands you a pitchfork. It's heavy. It smells like damp hay and regret. The first task of the day, muck the goat pen. You last 7 minutes. From there, it's onto the fields. You learn about crop rotations. That's what if Edwin explains it with 3 stones, a handful of mud, and a twig named barley. You nod wisely. Though internally you're just impressed he managed to make mud look like a lesson. Then comes fencing. Repairing the fence specifically. You hold the stakes while Edwin hammers. The fence is wobbly. Edwin says it's whimsically rustic. You say it's going to collapse the next time a sheep looks at it wrong. There's a rhythm to it all. A quiet, dusty kind of rhythm. Fieldwork is less about sweeping gestures and more about persistence. You rake, you dig, you lift, you sweat, and then you do it again. Fringe tidbit. Some medieval farmers used singing to coordinate their work, especially during long days of sowing or harvesting. Not just to pass time, but to keep pace and morale. Edwin tries this. Song is about turnips. It's not good, but it's earnest. After hours in the sun, you break for lunch. Bread, cheese, dried apples. Edwin offers you the better half of the cheese. You take it without hesitation. Love is built on small, dairy-based gestures. You talk about his father's tools, the neighbor's stubborn ox, and the absurd price of salt. He explains how taxes work under your local lord. It involves counting sacks of grain and pretending not to notice when the tally suddenly changes in the steward's favor. There's a lot of muttering and one joke about accidentally dropping a ledger into the stew. Historians still argue whether peasant husbands had true economic independence or were simply at the mercy of landowners and manorial duties. What's clear is that the weight of provision was constant. Food had to be grown, rent had to be paid, and heaven help you if the harvest failed, because the local tax collector certainly wouldn't. By late afternoon, your arms feel like pudding. You've got mud in places mud doesn't belong. Edwin offers you a ride back in the wheelbarrow. You decline. Barely at home, you wash up together at the barrel. You try not to notice the goat watching you from the window like it's plotting something. Suspect it always is. Dinner's simple, stew again. But this time, Edwin chops the onions. He doesn't cry. You do? Not because of the onions, just from exhaustion mostly? And maybe a little joy? You've seen his world now. It's not glamorous. It's not poetic. But it's real. It's hard. And it makes you grateful in a whole new way. That night, you lie beside him in bed and whisper, "You do a lot." He snorts. Don't tell the goat. He'll expect more. You laugh. You fall asleep. And for the first time since the wedding, you dream not of ceremony or feasts or flowers. You dream of soil, of growing things together. Let's say, just for fun, that you weren't born with calloused hands and a familiarity with goat-related injuries. Let's say your family is noble enough to own more than 2 forks and at least 1 tapestry that isn't just mold, pretending to be art. In that case, your wedding would have looked very, very different. Instead of a village procession and bread blessed by someone's cousin who once studied Latin, you'd be in a manor, or maybe even a castle, surrounded by linen-clad guests and more formality than humanly tolerable. Mainstream historical fact? For the nobility, weddings weren't just unions, they were strategies. Power, land, alliances, inheritance. These were the driving forces. A wedding between noble families could realign political landscapes, end feuds, or trigger them. Everything was choreographed, documented, and performed with careful splendor. Your dress would be a marvel. Velvet, silk, imported lace. Maybe even silver thread and a train so long you need a child to carry it, probably a very confused page boy whose only job is not to trip. Your hair would be styled with ribbons and jewels. Your veil might weigh more than your head. And your shoes, impractical, decorative, possibly designed to be seen, not walked in. The groom, he'd be dressed in the colors of his house, possibly in a doublet embroidered with his family crest, or, if he's extra dramatic, a cloak that swishes ominously. Behind him, his sword would gleam, his smile would not. The wedding would take place in a private chapel or grand hall. Candles everywhere, flowers flown in from somewhere ridiculous like France, or a hothouse just for the occasion. Latin vows. A bishop, or at least a very impressive abbot. And lots of witnesses, because you need everyone to agree that this happened exactly how the lawyers wrote it. Fringe tidbit. Noble weddings often included symbolic acts like the joining of hands over a sword or the exchange of rings placed on a plate of salt. One Germanic custom even included breaking a loaf of bread over the bride's head to ensure fertility. You hope, for her sake, it was a soft loaf. The feast would be legendary. Roasted swan, peacock with its feathers reattached, post-roasting for aesthetics. Obviously. Courses upon courses served with pomp, announced with trumpets, and occasionally garnished with gold leaf. Historians still argue whether anyone actually enjoyed these elaborate meals or just endured them out of duty and sheer hunger. Entertainment would include musicians, jesters, dancers, and maybe even a live bear on a chain if your father-in-law is feeling extra. One noble wedding recorded a mock battle between knights on horseback, staged in the courtyard while guests threw almonds and tried not to get impaled. Romance. You wouldn't sit beside your groom, by the way. Seating was strategic. You'd be placed to maximize visibility and diplomatic symbolism. The seating chart would look more like a chessboard than a family gathering. Your bedding ceremony? Oh, it would be witnessed, officially. 19 ladies and gentlemen who would walk. You to your chamber, ensure the bed was appropriately arranged, and, yes, sometimes watch you get in. There are even records of monarchs requiring documented proof of consummation signed by witnesses who swore they saw evidence. Privacy, it seems, was for peasants. But here's the part that's most different. Your future as a noble wife. Your duties extend far beyond hearth and child-rearing. You're now a household manager, a diplomatic agent, a keeper of your family's honor. You might oversee dozens of servants, manage the accounts, plan festivals, arrange future marriages. You might even, if your husband goes off to war or dies suddenly, run the estate entirely. You'd be expected to produce heirs. Yes, but also to preserve lineage, manage resources, and make sure the tapestries don't mildew. You might learn Latin, keep correspondence, read saints' lives, or compose devotional poetry if you're particularly literary or bored. In children, you'd likely see them in the morning, kiss their foreheads, and hand them off to a nursemaid. Their futures would be planned before their teeth came in. Daughters would marry strategically. Sons would go to monasteries or squireships, or both. Was it glamorous from a distance? Was it fulfilling? For some, was it exhausting, political, and lonely? Also yes. Historians still argue whether noblewomen found true agency within these roles or simply navigated the constraints with grace and strategy. Some wielded immense influence. Others were pawns. Most were somewhere in between. So yes, your wedding would have been grand. Your dress would sparkle, your feast would dazzle, but your life would depend entirely on your wit, your alliances, and whether the lord of the manor liked his soup salted just right, and if he didn't, you'd better hope the cook liked you more than he liked the lord. But let's strip away the velvet and the tapestries for a moment. Let's imagine you weren't born with a name anyone bothered to write down. Let's say you're not a noble, you're not even a well-off peasant. You're just one of the dirt hunter fingernails, share a low, fuv bread with a chicken. My dash best, dash dress, dash has, dash whole, dash in it. Majority, in that case, your wedding. It's going to look very different, not worse, just lightfully chaotic, mainstream historical. Fact, for the medieval poor, weddings were as practical as they were symbolic. Many didn't have access to churches or money for priests, or even clear documentation of their births. So, weddings were often informal, community-driven, and wildly inconsistent. A peasant marriage could be a grand gathering, or just two people saying vows in front of neighbors and a few grumpy goats. Let's walk through your day. You wake up early, as always. There's work to do, fields to check, goats to grumble at, bread to bake. But today, there's also a wedding to prepare for. Yours, you don't have a gown. You have your cleanest tunic, maybe stitched with a line of red thread near the hemorrhoid, for joy or fertility, or just because it's the only dye your aunt had left. You wear your hair braided, pinned with twigs of rosemary and a single feather someone says is lucky. You hope it's not from that chicken who stares at you funny. There's no veil. But your cousin lends you a ribbon. You tie it around your wrist. It itches. You meet your groom Tom, maybe your will, or aldered under a tree near the river. That's your wedding venue. A tree that leans slightly to the left and drops twigs on your head like confetti. A few neighbors gather. Some are there to celebrate. Some just want to see if there'll be food. A boy brings a jug of cider. A girl hands you a thistle and says, "It's for strength." You say thank you. You're not sure what else to say. A local priest might show up, if one's available. Not, someone's grandfather says a blessing and clears his throat in a way that sounds like authority. You and your groom exchange vows, simple, heartfelt, and slightly rushed because it looks like it might rain. Fringe tidbit. In many medieval communities, especially in rural areas, handfasting was common, a ceremony where couples would publicly join hands and declare their intention to be married. This was often considered legally binding, even without church involvement. In Scotland, this custom survived well into the early modern period, sometimes involving knots tied around the couple's wrists as a literal symbol of their bond. You hold hands. You say something like, "I take you," and he says, "And I you." And just like that, you're married. There's cheering, there's cider, there's a goat chewing on someone's tunic. Then comes the feast. It's not swan and marzipan. Castles, it's bread. Cheese, maybe a rabbit stew if someone got lucky with a trap that morning. There's a pie filled with root vegetables and a surprisingly tasty dollop of something that might be berry jam, or possibly beets. People sit on the grass. Someone plays a whistle. Someone else sings a song that includes exactly 6 verses about turnips and one extremely racy line about butter churning. You blush. Your new husband laughs. You lean against each other and try not to think about how many chores tomorrow will bring. You dance, not a formal dance. A jumping, stomping, laugh until you fall kind of dance. Barefoot, dusty, joyful. A child joins in. Someone trips. Someone else steals a kiss and gets chased by a goose. It's all perfect. And then, without fanfare, people start leaving. Back to the fields. Back to the milking. Back to life. You and your husband walk home together. No parade. No bedding ceremony with an audience. Just 2 people. 1 blanket and a shared roof that leaks in the corner. Historians still argue whether These informal unions were less real than the church-sanctioned ones. But in practice, they were deeply valid, recognized by communities, upheld by custom, and sometimes more enduring than the grandest noble match. Your new home might be a shared cottage or a borrowed corner of his parents' house. You unpack your things: half a comb, a wooden spoon, a tiny bundle of dried lavender, your grandmother tucked into your satchel. You light a fire. You share a crust of bread. You look at each other and say, well then, that's it. No doves. Just the beginning of a life. Simple, sincere, scrappy, but undeniably yours. Now, not every wedding was blessed by sunshine, willingly signed parchments, or the absence of scandalous relatives. Sometimes, just sometimes, love and marriage didn't follow the rules. They slinked down shadowy alleys, ducked into chapels, by moonlight, got themselves tangled in all kinds of trouble. Welcome to the world of forbidden weddings and secret lovers, mainstream historical fact. Despite the church's growing control over marriage, laws in the Middle Ages, especially after the 12th century, clandestine marriages were common. These unions were often made in secret, without bans, the formal church announcement, without family consent, and sometimes without a priest. As long as both parties consented and said the right words, it was technically valid, though absolutely scandalous. Imagine, you're the daughter of a miller. You've been sneaking glances at the blacksmith's apprentice for months. He's strong, smells like fire and leather, and once helped you carry a sack of grain without even teasing you. You're supposed to marry a man named Osric, who owns 3 sheep and a permanent scowl. But your heart is very much elsewhere. One night, you and your beloved slip out under cover of darkness. A friendly monk, possibly a bit tipsy, is persuaded to perform a private ceremony by the river. The witnesses: sleepy dog, a bat, and your best friend who swears she won't tell but definitely does. You exchange whispered vows, clasped hands, and vow eternal loyalty under a willow tree. By morning, you're married, secretly, illegally, entirely fringe tidbit. There are records of marriages witnessed by animals: pigs, chickens, even a cat or two when no human witnesses were available. Some rural communities viewed this as a sort of mystical binding. Others just didn't ask questions. These marriages were often discovered later, usually during disputes over dowries or inheritance, and the church was not amused. Penalties ranged from fines to public penance, or if you were noble enough, annulment and exile. But for the peasantry, many of these secret unions simply became fact over time. Once you lived together and had a child or two, the village accepted it, legal parchment or not. Historians still debate how often clandestine marriages were truly romantic rebellions versus practical solutions. Some were love matches, some were desperate escapes from arranged marriages, abusive homes, or lords who viewed daughters as bargaining chips. Others were impulsive choices made under moonlight, cider, and very poor decision-making skills. In one particularly strange tale from 14th century England, a couple exchanged vows over a plow in a field, invoking not God, but the spirit of the harvest. The church declared it invalid. The couple responded by moving to the next village and pretending it never happened. Love evidently was mobile. There were also proxy marriages. You heard that right. If the groom couldn't attend in person, say, he was off crusading or imprisoned. 4. Let's say sheep theft. He could appoint someone to stand in his place. One infamous example involved a noblewoman who married a knight's suit of armor in his absence. The armor didn't say much, but it was very shiny. And what about when a marriage wasn't just secret but forbidden? Monks and nuns, for instance, took vows of celibacy. But vows are flimsy things when feelings get involved. There are letters, records, and downright steamy love poems written between cloistered lovers. Some ended tragically. Others became scandalous legends. A runaway nun here, a lovesick friar that it reads like medieval fan fiction. But it's very real. One story tells of a nun and a monk who arranged to marry, in secret by exchanging bread and wine in the woods, mimicking a wedding mass. They were discovered when she returned to the convent barefoot and humming. The abbot reportedly was not amused. Sometimes forbidden love turned to elopement. A young couple might flee to another town, claim new identities, and start fresh. In such cases, the only thing standing between them and a happy life was the medieval version of being doxed, which is to say, someone's cousin showing up and shouting, "Hey, aren't you the baker's daughter?" But for all the rules and risks, secret marriages carried a kind of power. They were acts of rebellion, declarations of agency, or just deeply human moments of wanting something different, something chosen. So if you'd been born with a rebellious streak and a love of dramatic exits, you might have said your vows in a barn, a field, or a shadowed cloister. Your ring might be a carved wooden bead. Your officiant might be a cousin who once saw a priest do it, and your witnesses. Well, one of them might be a pig, a very polite, very attentive pig, and honestly, that might be the most honest wedding of all. Years pass, you're still married, and somehow, you're still surprised by that fact each time. You wake up to Edwin's snoring and the familiar sound of a rooster with boundary issues. What began as a flurry of petals, pie, and awkwardly sung, ballads has settled into something much quieter, something shaped by weather and seasons, by chores and laughter, by the slow, creaky rhythm of medieval life. You've grown into your marriage the way ivy grows on old stone walls, clinging, winding, sometimes stubbornly, but always making space for the light. The days are long. The nights are cold. And the years, when you look back, feel like a woven tapestry of routines and rituals. The wedding, the feast, the bedding, it all seems like a lifetime ago. Mainstream historical fact. Most medieval marriages, especially among commoners, were enduring partnerships built on interdependence rather than romance. Divorce was rare and difficult. Life expectancy was shorter. People died young, but those who stayed together often did so out of shared necessity, companionship, and eventually, deep familiarity that might even become love. You've had children. Maybe 2, maybe 6. Maybe you lost one. Maybe more. It happens in this world. Too often. But you keep going, because that's what people do. You wrap the living in wool and the lost in prayers. You kiss scraped knees and worry over fevers, and celebrate every tooth, every word, every step. Edwin changes too. He still can't fix that squeaky latch on the grained chest, but he's become gentler with time. He listens now. Brings you little things, berries, odd-shaped rocks, dried flowers that smell like your wedding day. And you are not the same girl who was marched to a church with rosemary in her braids. You're tougher, wiser, better at stew, still terrible. At bread, but you've made peace with that. Fringe tidbit. Some medieval communities had silver anniversaries of sorts, not in the grand modern sense, but little community observances, where long married couples were toasted with ale and reminded that surviving marriage was, in itself, a holy act. Sometimes these celebrations happened at church. Sometimes they happened by the fire with a good pie. The world outside your home changes too. There are plagues, famines, new kings, new taxes, a war or two. You lose friends, you gain grandnieces. Someone invents a better plow. You pretend to understand how it works. Historians still argue whether medieval marriage offered true emotional intimacy. But in your quiet moments sharing a bench, watching the sun set through a thatched window, you think, maybe it did. Maybe it does. Sometimes Edwin puts his hand over yours without saying a word. Sometimes you catch him watching you across the hearth with a smile that has nothing to do with duty or survival, just ... affection. And when you argue, which you do, it's no longer about forgetting the firewood or who moved the cheesecloth. It's about how much you care, how tired you both are, how much you want tomorrow to be better. One day, you find the old ribbon from your wedding day, tucked in a box beneath a pile of lavender and thread. It's faded now, smells a little musty, but you run your fingers over it like it's silk. You remember the feast, the song, the way Edwin tripped over a chicken during your first dance. You laugh, maybe you cry a little too. Now at night, you sit together in the glow of the hearth, no longer new. It's no longer uncertain, just together. And as the seasons turn and your hair grows silver and the roof still leaks in the same place it always has, you find something beautiful in the quiet, in the shared silences, the simple act of staying till death do you part, but not quite yet, and now. As the fire burns low and the village sleeps beneath a blanket of stars and hay-scented dreams, you feel the weight of time soften into something gentle. The wedding is long past. The music, the laughter, the awkward first kiss, faded into memory like embroidery worn thin with use. And yet it lingers. In the creak of a familiar floorboard, in the scent of rosemary drifting from the hearth, in the quiet hush of your husband's, breathing beside you. The medieval world doesn't pause for reflection often. But here in this space between day and dream let yourself breathe. Let your shoulders ease. Let the rhythm of the years become a soft drum beat in the background of your thoughts. The fire crackles gently. A kettle hisses. A sleepy chicken murmurs somewhere outside, rearranging feathers with the same sleepy stubbornness you feel in your bones. You've lived a life. Built it with your hands. Laughed, worked, mourned, loved, sometimes all in one day, and now you rest. The embers glow. The straw mattress shifts. The wind taps gently at the shutters, not like a warning, but like a lullaby. So close your eyes. Let the medieval world slip away its noise, its rituals, its dancing geese and mysteriously crunchy stews. You've earned your rest. Love, you are home. You are safe. You are loved. Sleep now, and let the centuries cradle you in their arms. Asterisk end. Of script, sweet dreams.